A black man is promoted to head chef of the top restaurant in the city. A jealous white chef disagrees with the hiring and secretly tries to get the black man fired. However, he is shocked when the black man approaches him with the restaurant owner. Jerome Carter stood at the entrance of Laureate, taking in the sight of the restaurant he was now head chef of. The glass doors, polished to perfection, reflected the afternoon sun, casting a warm glow on the sleek exterior. This was a far cry from the small kitchens he'd worked in before, and he felt a mix of excitement and determination as he pushed the door open. Inside, the restaurant buzzed with the muted sounds of preparation. Waitstaff moved briskly between tables, polishing silverware and setting out fresh linens. In the open kitchen, chefs and line cooks were busy chopping vegetables, stirring pots, and preparing for the evening service. Jerome's eyes scanned the room, noting the curious glances and whispered conversations as he approached. He took a deep breath and walked through the kitchen doors. The conversations halted, and a silence fell over the staff. He recognized a few faces from his interviews, but most were new to him. His gaze landed on Mark Wallace, the sous chef, standing at the far end of the counter. Mark's expression was stony, his arms crossed over his chest. "Good afternoon, everyone," Jerome began, his voice steady and confident. "I'm Jerome Carter, your new head chef. I know stepping into a new kitchen can be a bit of an adjustment, but I'm excited to work with all of you to take Laureate to the next level." There was a murmur of polite acknowledgement from the staff, but the atmosphere remained tense. Mark stepped forward, his tone casual but laced with sarcasm. "So what's the plan, chef?" Mark asked, emphasizing the title. "Gonna change everything around here just because you're in charge now?" Jerome met his gaze evenly. "I'm here to bring out the best in this kitchen. That means working together, respecting each other's skills, and creating the kind of food that's going to keep Laureate at the top. I'm not here to change everything. I'm here to make sure we keep growing." Mark gave a thin smile. Sure. Just seems like there's a lot of changes happening around here lately. New management, new direction." Linda Drummond, the owner, chose that moment to enter the kitchen, her presence immediately commanding attention. She was a tall woman with sharp features, dressed in an elegant business suit that contrasted with the casual uniforms of the kitchen staff. "Good to see everyone getting acquainted," Linda said, her voice crisp. "I want to make it clear that Jerome is here because he's the best. He's got the talent and the vision we need. So let's put aside any reservations and focus on what matters, making sure Laureate stays the best restaurant in the city." There were nods from the staff, though some were hesitant. Mark, however, didn't back down. "Of course, Mrs. Drummond. Just want to make sure we're all on the same page. It's a big change, after all." Linda's gaze narrowed slightly, but she kept her tone even. "Change can be challenging, but it's necessary. I trust everyone here will give Jerome their full support. If anyone has concerns, my door is always open." Jerome watched the exchange carefully. He knew Mark was testing boundaries, trying to see how far he could push. He appreciated Linda's support, but he also knew he needed to establish his own authority. "I understand there might be some uncertainty," Jerome said, stepping in. "I'm not here to force anything on anyone. My goal is to work with you, learn from you, and create something amazing together. I hope you'll give me the chance to prove that." There was a moment of silence, and then Luis Rivera, one of the line cooks, spoke up. "Welcome, chef. We're ready to work." A few others murmured their agreement, and Jerome felt a small surge of relief. It wasn't a full endorsement, but it was a start. "Thank you, Luis, and thank you to everyone. Let's get to work," Jerome said, clapping his hands lightly. "We've got a busy night ahead." The staff dispersed, returning to their stations. Jerome moved through the kitchen, introducing himself more personally to each team member. He complimented Mia Nguyen on her precise pastry work and discussed a few ideas with Luis about seasonal ingredients. He made a point to be approachable, listening more than he spoke, understanding the dynamics of the kitchen. Mark stayed at a distance, his expression guarded. Jerome knew this wasn't the end of the conflict, just the beginning. He could feel the tension simmering beneath the surface, but he was determined not to let it distract him. He had faced worse in his career and had come out stronger every time. As the evening service began, the kitchen fell into its familiar rhythm. Jerome stepped into his role with ease, coordinating orders, adjusting plates, and offering guidance where needed. He felt the eyes of the staff on him, watching, judging. He kept his movements deliberate, his instructions clear and calm. Slowly, he sensed the mood shifting, the initial hostility giving way to curiosity, and in some cases, grudging respect. But Mark's gaze was like a knife in his back, sharp and unyielding. Every time Jerome gave an order, Mark's face tightened, his responses clipped and borderline insubordinate. It was clear he wasn't going to make this easy. By the end of the night, the service had gone off without a hitch. Jerome gathered the staff for a quick debrief, thanking them for their hard work and offering constructive feedback. The atmosphere was still tense, but he could see small cracks in the wall of resistance. It would take time, but he was willing to put in the effort. As the staff began to leave, Jerome caught Mark's eye. "Mark, can I have a word?" Mark hesitated, then nodded, following Jerome to a quieter corner of the kitchen. "I know this transition isn't easy," Jerome said, keeping his tone neutral. "But I need to know we're on the same team here." Mark's smile was cold. "Of course, chef. Just trying to get used to all the changes." Jerome nodded slowly. "I get that, but we both want what's best for this restaurant. If you have any issues, let's talk about them directly. I'm here to work with you, not against you." Mark's expression didn't soften. "Sure thing, chef. Whatever you say." Jerome held his gaze for a moment longer, then nodded. "Good. Let's make this place the best it can be." Mark gave a non-committal shrug and walked away. Jerome watched him go, knowing that the battle lines had been drawn, but he wasn't about to back down. He'd earned this position, and he intended to prove that he was exactly where he belonged. As he turned back to his station, Jerome took a deep breath. It was just the first day, and he had a long road ahead, but he was ready for it. He'd fought too hard to get here, and he wasn't going to let anyone push him out. The kitchen lights dimmed as the last of the staff filed out, leaving Jerome alone in the quiet space. He looked around, imagining the possibilities. This was his kitchen now, and he was going to make it shine. Mark Wallace's footsteps echoed down the hallway as he made his way to Linda Drummond's office. The walls were lined with framed photos of the restaurant's past triumphs, smiling chefs, award ceremonies, newspaper clippings praising Laureate's cuisine. Mark's eyes glanced over each image, his jaw tightening with every step. It was supposed to be him in those pictures as the head chef, leading the team, not Jerome Carter. He stopped outside Linda's office, took a deep breath, and knocked sharply on the door. "Come in," came Linda's voice, cool and controlled as always. Mark pushed the door open, trying to keep his emotions in check. Linda sat behind her desk, a stack of paperwork in front of her. She looked up, her expression composed but curious. "Mark," she said, leaning back in her chair, "what can I do for you?" Mark closed the door behind him and crossed his arms. "I think you know why I'm here." Linda raised an eyebrow. "If it's about Jerome, I've made my decision. He's the head chef now. You're the sous chef. That's how it is." Mark let out a short, bitter laugh. "You can't be serious. I've been here for years, Linda. I've put in the work, the hours, and now you bring in this outsider to take the position that should have been mine?" Linda's expression didn't change. "Mark, Jerome is not an outsider. He's an incredibly talented chef with a proven track record. He was the best candidate for the job." "Best candidate?" Mark's voice rose. "Or did you hire him because it looks good on paper? You know, a black head chef in a place like this? Trying to be progressive?" Linda's eyes narrowed slightly, her voice taking on a sharper edge. "I hired Jerome because he's the best person for the position. He's here to help Laureate grow and evolve. This has nothing to do with optics." "Nothing to do with optics?" Mark repeated, his tone incredulous. "Come on, Linda. This place has always been about tradition, about maintaining a standard. You're just throwing that away for some publicity stunt?" Linda took a deep breath, clearly trying to keep her patience. "Mark, this isn't about tradition versus progress. It's about keeping this restaurant relevant and excellent. Jerome brings something new, something fresh. That's what we need right now." Mark shook his head, his frustration boiling over. "I've given everything to this place, and now you're telling me I'm not good enough?" "That's not what I'm saying," Linda replied firmly. "You're a valuable part of this team, Mark. But you have to understand, being head chef isn't just about cooking. It's about leadership, vision, and the ability to adapt." Mark's face flushed with anger. "Adapt? You mean go along with whatever you say, right?" Linda's gaze didn't waver. "I mean working together to make this restaurant the best it can be. Jerome is the head chef, and that's not changing. I need you to support him, or we need to have a serious conversation about your future here." There was a tense silence as Mark stared at her, his mind racing. He wanted to yell, to demand that she see things his way, but he knew pushing too hard could cost him everything he'd worked for. He forced himself to take a deep breath, unclenching his fists. "I'll try," he said finally, the words bitter on his tongue. "But don't expect me to be happy about it." "I don't expect you to be happy right away," Linda said calmly. "I just need you to do your job. Do that, and everything will fall into place." Mark didn't respond. He turned and left the office, shutting the door behind him with a little more force than necessary. His heart was pounding, his thoughts a tangled mess of resentment and frustration. How could she not see it? How could she just dismiss everything he'd done for this place? And for what? To look good in the press? To feel like she was making some kind of statement? He stormed back to the kitchen, ignoring the curious glances from the staff. His mind was racing with ideas, thoughts tumbling over one another in a chaotic blur. If Linda thought he was just going to sit back and watch everything he'd built be handed over to Jerome, she was in for a surprise. He knew this kitchen better than anyone. He knew every flaw, every vulnerability. It wouldn't take much to show everyone that Jerome wasn't up to the task. Just a few nudges here and there, a few mistakes that could be blamed on poor communication or lack of oversight. Mark's lips twisted into a grim smile as he reached his station. He wasn't going to let this go. If Jerome wanted to be head chef, he was going to have to fight for it. And Mark was going to make damn sure that fight wasn't an easy one. The sounds of the kitchen washed over him as he picked up his knife and began chopping vegetables with precise, angry strokes. He kept his head down, his thoughts focused on his plan. It would take time, but he had patience. After all, he'd been overlooked before and come back stronger. This time would be no different. As he worked, he glanced over at Jerome, who was discussing a new dish with Mia and Luis. They seemed animated, excited. Mark's jaw clenched. That excitement wouldn't last. Not once they started to see the cracks in Jerome's leadership, the little problems that would add up, making him look incompetent. Mark turned back to his cutting board, his movements methodical. He was going to remind everyone why he should have been head chef. And if he had to take Jerome down to do it, so be it. Linda might think she'd made the right choice, but she was wrong. He was going to show her just how wrong she was. The knife in his hand moved faster, the rhythm of the blade against the board almost hypnotic. He imagined the look on Linda's face when everything started to fall apart, the moment when she realized her mistake. And when that moment came, he'd be ready to take his place as head chef, where he should have been all along. The dinner rush had begun, and the kitchen was alive with the clatter of pots and pans, the sizzle of meat hitting the grill, and the rapid-fire shouts of orders being called out. Jerome moved with practiced ease through the chaos, his focus razor-sharp. He directed the line cooks, checked plating, and made minor adjustments to dishes as they passed through the pass. "Table 5 scallops," he called, his voice steady but firm. "Scallops up," Luis shouted back, sliding the plate towards Jerome. Jerome inspected the dish, nodding his approval. "Perfect. Let's keep this pace up." He felt a brief sense of satisfaction. The kitchen was running smoothly, and the staff seemed to be responding well to his leadership, even if there was still an undercurrent of tension. He glanced over at Mark, who was working the sauté station with his usual precision. Mark's face was set in a mask of concentration, his movements mechanical. Jerome knew better than to let his guard down. Mark had agreed to work with him, but there was no trust between them. He was on edge, waiting for the other shoe to drop. "Chef, we've got a problem." Mia's voice broke through his thoughts. Jerome turned to see her standing by the walk-in refrigerator, holding a crate of tomatoes. Her brow was furrowed and she looked concerned. "What's wrong?" Jerome asked, moving towards her. "These tomatoes," she said, holding one up. "They're not the heirlooms we ordered. They're standard Romas, and they're not even ripe." Jerome frowned, taking the tomato from her. It was pale and firm, nothing like the rich, vibrant heirlooms they needed for the signature salad. He felt a flicker of irritation. He had double-checked the orders himself this morning. "Let me see the delivery sheet," he said, walking to the clipboard hanging by the door. He scanned the sheet, his eyes narrowing. The order was correct, but what had been delivered was not. This wasn't the first time something like this had happened recently. A few days ago, a batch of fish had arrived in poor condition, and there had been an issue with the herbs before that. "Did anyone sign for this delivery?" he asked, looking around. Luis stepped forward. "I did, chef. Everything looked fine from the outside. I didn't check inside the crates." Jerome nodded, his mind racing. Mistakes happened, but this was beginning to feel deliberate. He glanced at Mark, who was working silently, his back turned. "All right," Jerome said, keeping his tone calm. "We'll have to improvise. Luis, go to the back and see if we have any viable tomatoes left from the last delivery. Mia, start prepping what we have." "We'll work around it." Luis nodded and hurried off. Mia gave him a quick smile before turning back to her station. Jerome sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. This wasn't just a minor inconvenience. Subpar ingredients could ruin their reputation, but he couldn't jump to conclusions without proof. He walked back to the pass, where Mark was plating a series of dishes. "Mark, did you notice anything strange about the delivery this morning?" Jerome asked casually, watching him carefully. Mark didn't look up. "Nope, looked like the usual stuff." "Maybe someone's getting sloppy in the prep." Jerome kept his expression neutral. "It's more than just sloppy. This isn't the first time something's been off. We've had issues with deliveries and inventory. I'm going to start keeping a closer eye on things." Mark shrugged, his tone dismissive. "Things happen. Maybe the vendors are cutting corners, trying to save a buck. Or maybe it's just bad luck." "Maybe," Jerome said, though he didn't believe it. "But bad luck doesn't happen this often." Mark didn't respond, focusing on his plating. Jerome took a deep breath and moved back to the center of the kitchen. He couldn't afford to get distracted. He had a team to lead, and they had a full house tonight. As the evening wore on, the kitchen settled into its rhythm. The staff moved like a well-oiled machine, and despite the earlier setback, the dishes going out were flawless. But Jerome couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Every time he glanced at Mark, he caught the sous chef's eyes flickering with something: anger, resentment, or maybe something more. Near the end of the night, as the last few orders were being prepared, another issue arose. Jerome was reviewing the dessert orders when Mia rushed over, her face flushed. "Chef, the vanilla beans are missing," she said, her voice tense. "I swear they were there this morning, but now the container's empty." Jerome felt his frustration spike. The vanilla beans were crucial for the crème brûlée, one of their most popular desserts. He turned to Mark, who was wiping down his station. "Mark, did you see anyone use the vanilla beans today?" Mark looked up, his expression blank. "Nope. Maybe someone used them up and forgot to restock. We just got a new batch in last week," Jerome said, trying to keep his voice steady. "There should have been plenty." Mark shrugged again. "I don't know what to tell you. Things get misplaced." Jerome clenched his jaw. This was too much to be a coincidence. But he couldn't accuse Mark outright, not without proof. He turned back to Mia. "We'll have to adjust the dessert menu for tonight," he said. "Can we use the chocolate ganache for the profiteroles instead?" Mia nodded. "I'll get on it, chef." Jerome watched her hurry back to the pastry station, then turned to Mark. "We need to be more careful with inventory. I'm going to start logging everything myself. If something goes missing, I want to know about it immediately." "Sure thing, chef," Mark said, his tone almost mocking. Jerome forced himself to stay calm. He couldn't let Mark get under his skin. He had to stay focused, keep the kitchen running smoothly. But as he moved through the rest of the night, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was walking a tightrope and someone was trying to make him fall. When the last plate left the pass and the kitchen began to wind down, Jerome called the staff together. He kept his voice even as he thanked them for their hard work and addressed the issues they'd faced. "We had some setbacks tonight," he said, looking around at the tired but attentive faces. "But you all handled it well. I'm proud of how we came together to keep things running smoothly. We need to tighten up on inventory and communication. We can't afford these kinds of mistakes." There were murmurs of agreement, and Jerome felt a flicker of hope. The staff was on his side, or at least they weren't against him. But he knew he couldn't rely on hope alone. As the staff began to clean up, Jerome approached Luis, who was wiping down his station. "Luis, can I ask you to help me with the inventory checks from now on? I want to make sure everything's in order." Luis nodded, looking relieved. "Of course, chef. I'll keep an eye on things." "Thanks," Jerome said, clapping him on the shoulder. "We need to stay vigilant. If something's off, I need to know right away." "Got it," Luis said, his expression serious. Jerome nodded and moved to his office, his mind churning with plans. He was going to have to be more proactive, more vigilant. Mark was up to something, and he needed to figure out what before it escalated. He sat down at his desk, staring at the order sheets in front of him. He'd have to go through everything, double-check every delivery, every order. It would be time-consuming, but he couldn't afford to let anything slip through the cracks. As he began reviewing the paperwork, he felt a mixture of anger and determination. Mark was trying to undermine him, but Jerome wasn't going to let him win. He'd fought too hard to get here, and he wasn't going to be pushed out. He was going to show Mark and everyone else that he deserved to be head chef of Laureate. And if Mark wanted a fight, Jerome was ready. He wasn't going to back down, not now, not ever. Jerome stood in the center of the kitchen, a variety of ingredients spread out on the counter before him. The staff gathered around, curiosity and skepticism mingling on their faces. This was the first time he'd called a meeting specifically to introduce new dishes, and he knew he had to make a strong impression. "All right, everyone, thanks for taking the time to be here," Jerome began, his voice calm but firm. "I've been thinking a lot about how we can elevate the menu. Laureate has a tradition of excellence, and I want to build on that by introducing some new elements, things that reflect modern techniques and flavors without losing our core identity." Mark stood off to the side, arms crossed, his expression unreadable. Jerome ignored him and focused on the rest of the team. He picked up a piece of cured duck breast and held it up. "This is duck prosciutto," he explained. "I've paired it with a spiced fig compote and a bitter green salad. It's a twist on a classic, using familiar flavors but in a new context." He began to assemble the dish, speaking as he worked. "We've got the saltiness of the prosciutto, the sweetness and warmth of the fig, and the bitterness from the greens to balance it out. This is what I mean by elevating the menu, taking what we know works and pushing it just a bit further." There was a murmur of interest from the staff. Mia, the pastry chef, leaned in closer, studying the dish with keen eyes. "Chef, where did you get the figs? They're not in season right now," she asked. Jerome smiled. "Good question. They're preserved. I make a batch every summer and use them throughout the year. They hold their flavor and texture really well. He finished plating and handed the dish to Mia, who took a bite, her expression thoughtful. A few other staff members followed suit, sampling the dish. Luis, the line cook, nodded appreciatively. "That's good, chef," he said. "Really good. I've never had duck like that before." Jerome felt a small surge of relief. It was a simple thing, a single dish, but it was a start. He turned to the rest of the group. "I know change can be challenging," he said, addressing the unspoken tension in the room. "But I believe that if we're willing to take some risks, we can make Laureate even better than it already is. I'm not here to throw out what's worked for so long. I'm here to build on it." Mark let out a derisive snort. "What's next, chef? Molecular gastronomy? Foam on everything?" There were a few chuckles, but Jerome didn't flinch. He turned to Mark, his tone even. "No, Mark, I'm not interested in gimmicks. I'm interested in taking what we do best and refining it. If you have suggestions, I'm all ears." Mark shrugged, his expression bored. "Just saying, customers come here because they know what to expect. Too much change, and we might lose them." Jerome nodded slowly. "I hear you. But I think our customers also come here for excellence. They trust us to give them an experience they can't get anywhere else. That's what I want to focus on, making sure every dish that leaves this kitchen is something special." There was a silence, and then Mia spoke up again, her voice thoughtful. "I like the direction you're going, chef. I think it could work if we do it right." Luis nodded in agreement. "Yeah, I'm with Mia. It's different, but it's good different." Jerome felt a small smile tug at his lips. It wasn't universal approval, but it was something. "Thanks, guys. I'm glad to hear that. I'm going to be introducing a few more dishes like this over the next few weeks. I'd love your input on them." He turned back to the counter, picking up another set of ingredients. "Now, I've got something else I want to show you. A dessert idea, actually. Mia, I'd love to get your thoughts on this." He started preparing a simple yet elegant dish, poached pears with a spiced red wine reduction, served over a light almond cream. As he worked, he explained his thought process, the balance of flavors and textures he was aiming for. Mia watched closely, her skepticism slowly turning to interest. When he handed her a spoonful to taste, she took it carefully, her expression thoughtful. "This is really nice, chef," she said finally. "The almond cream balances out the tartness of the pears, and the spice in the reduction gives it depth. I think we could work with this." Jerome's smile widened. "I'm glad you like it. I've got a few more variations I'd like to try, but this is the basic idea." Mark made a show of checking his watch. "This all sounds great, chef, but we've got service in a couple of hours. Shouldn't we be focusing on getting ready for that?" Jerome nodded, keeping his tone steady. "Absolutely. I appreciate everyone taking the time. Let's get back to prep." The staff began to disperse, but Jerome noticed a few lingering, still talking about the new dishes. Mia caught up to him as he was cleaning his station. "Chef, I have a couple of ideas for that dessert," she said. "Maybe we could infuse the cream with a bit of orange zest or try a different spice profile in the reduction." Jerome nodded, feeling a genuine excitement. "I'd love to hear your thoughts. Let's try it out when we have some time." As Mia headed back to her station, Luis approached, a thoughtful look on his face. "Chef, about that duck dish, do you think we could do something similar with lamb? Maybe with a different kind of fruit?" Jerome's eyes lit up. "Absolutely. We can experiment with that. I'd love to see what we can come up with." Luis grinned. "I'll start working on it." Jerome watched him go, feeling a sense of accomplishment. This was what he wanted, to inspire the team, to get them thinking creatively. He knew he still had a long way to go to fully win them over, but today felt like a step in the right direction. As the dinner service began, Jerome noticed a subtle shift in the atmosphere. The staff seemed more engaged, more willing to listen to his suggestions and to offer their own. There were still moments of tension. Mark was quick to challenge him on minor points, and a few of the older staff members seemed reluctant to embrace the changes. But overall, things felt smoother, more cohesive. At one point, Mia came over with a small spoonful of a new sauce she'd been working on. "I tried your idea with the orange zest," she said, handing him the spoon. "What do you think?" Jerome tasted it, savoring the bright, citrusy flavor. "That's fantastic, Mia. I think it really elevates the dish." She beamed, clearly pleased with the feedback. "Thanks, chef. I'm excited to see what else we can come up with." As the night went on, Jerome continued to engage with the staff, offering guidance and support where needed. He made a point of checking in with each station, giving praise where it was due, and addressing any issues with calm, constructive feedback. By the time the last plate left the pass, he felt a sense of satisfaction he hadn't experienced in a while. The staff was tired but upbeat, the earlier skepticism replaced by a cautious optimism. After service, Jerome called everyone together for a quick debrief. "Great work tonight, everyone. I know I've been pushing a lot of new ideas, and I really appreciate your openness and hard work. We're heading in a good direction." There were nods and murmurs of agreement, and Jerome felt a small surge of hope. He glanced at Mark, who was standing at the edge of the group, his expression unreadable. "Let's keep this momentum going," Jerome continued. "I know we can take this place to the next level." The staff dispersed, and Jerome headed back to his office. As he gathered his things, he thought about the day's events. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress. He was beginning to see cracks in the walls of resistance that had been built up around him. He knew it wouldn't be easy, and there would be more challenges ahead. But for the first time since he'd taken the job, he felt like he was starting to find his place, and that was a victory worth celebrating, no matter how small. As he turned off the lights and headed out, he allowed himself a rare moment of optimism. The road ahead was long, but he was ready to walk it. One step at a time, he would prove that he belonged here, that he was exactly where he was meant to be. The night was in full swing, the dining room filled with the low hum of conversation and the soft clinking of glasses. The kitchen, as usual, was a controlled frenzy of activity. Jerome stood at the pass, checking each dish with the meticulous eye of someone who understood that excellence was found in the smallest details. "Order up! Filet! Medium rare!" Jerome called out, his voice cutting through the noise. "Filet? Medium rare. Yes, chef," came the reply from the line cook. The staff moved in practiced rhythm, executing each dish with precision, but Jerome's focus was split. He couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The past few days had been plagued with minor setbacks, misplaced ingredients, spoiled produce, odd gaps in the inventory. He'd tightened protocols, kept a close watch on deliveries, and yet, things continued to go wrong. "Chef, can you check this?" Mia's voice broke through his thoughts. She was holding a plate of creme brulee, her brow furrowed. "Something's not right with the custard. It's grainy." Jerome took the plate and examined it, his frown deepening. He tasted a small spoonful and immediately noticed the gritty texture, completely wrong for the smooth, creamy consistency it should have had. "This isn't the right cream," he said, more to himself than to Mia. "Did you use the heavy cream we ordered last week?" Mia shook her head. "We ran out yesterday. I had to use what was left in the fridge, but I thought it was still good." Jerome's heart sank. He knew he'd ordered more cream, plenty to last them through the week. He'd checked it himself. "Who did the inventory check yesterday?" he asked, his voice tense. Mark's voice floated over from the other side of the kitchen, casual and indifferent. "I did, chef. Looked fine to me." Jerome turned to face him, his frustration bubbling just beneath the surface. "Did you notice anything unusual? Missing items? Or anything that didn't seem right?" Mark shrugged, wiping his hands on a towel. "Nope, everything seemed in order. Maybe someone's been a little careless?" Jerome's jaw tightened. He knew Mark was taunting him, but without proof, he couldn't call him out directly. He took a deep breath, forcing himself to stay calm. "We need to find a solution. Mia, can you use the last batch of cream for the desserts tonight? I'll figure out what's going on with the inventory." Mia nodded and hurried back to her station. Jerome felt a pang of guilt. None of this was her fault, but she was bearing the brunt of it. He turned his attention back to the service, pushing his concerns to the back of his mind. He couldn't afford distractions, not with a full house. As the night wore on, the issues piled up. A batch of risotto came out undercooked. A delivery of oysters had gone bad, and a crucial garnish had somehow disappeared from the prep station. Jerome's frustration mounted with each new problem. He could see the strain on the staff's faces, the way their movements became more tense and less fluid as the evening progressed. "Chef, Table 12 is asking about their main course," Luis called out, his voice strained. Jerome glanced at the ticket. Table 12 was one of their VIPs, a regular who expected nothing less than perfection. Their main course should have been out 10 minutes ago. "Where's the venison for Table 12? Jerome asked, scanning the line. "It's not here," the line cook stammered, looking flustered. "It was supposed to be in the cooler, but it's gone." Jerome felt his temper flare. "Gone? What do you mean gone?" "I don't know, chef. It's not there. I checked twice." Jerome closed his eyes for a moment, willing himself to stay calm. This wasn't just bad luck or carelessness. Someone was deliberately sabotaging them. He turned to Mark, who was watching the chaos with a slight smirk on his face. "Mark, you were on prep this afternoon. Did you see the venison?" Mark shrugged, his expression infuriatingly bland. "Sure, it was there. Maybe someone moved it. Could have gotten misplaced." "Misplaced?" Jerome repeated, his voice dangerously low. "It was prepped and ready for service. How could it get misplaced?" Mark's eyes flickered with something like amusement. "Things happen, chef. Maybe you should have kept a closer eye on it." Jerome took a step closer, his voice dropping. "You and I both know this isn't about keeping an eye on things. I don't know what game you're playing, but it stops now." Mark's smile widened, just a fraction. "Game? I'm just doing my job, chef. Maybe you're not as good at yours as you think. Jerome's hands curled into fists, but he forced himself to turn away. He couldn't let Mark bait him, not in front of the staff. He needed to stay in control. Luis, make a substitution. Use the beef tenderloin. Cook it medium rare. We need to get that table served now, Jerome said, his voice steady despite the anger simmering beneath. Luis nodded and moved quickly to comply. Jerome watched him go, his mind racing. He needed to figure out what was happening before it spiraled further out of control. He couldn't keep fighting these fires all night. When the last orders had finally gone out and the kitchen began to wind down, Jerome called the staff together. He could see the exhaustion on their faces, the frustration in their eyes. He took a deep breath, trying to find the right words. Tonight was tough, and I know we had a lot of issues, he began. I want to thank all of you for pushing through and keeping things together. I know it wasn't easy. There were a few nods, but mostly silence. The staff was drained, the tension still thick in the air. We need to tighten up on our inventory and prep, Jerome continued. If something doesn't look right, if anything seems off, I need you to tell me immediately. We can't afford to have nights like this. He glanced at Mark, who was leaning against the counter, his expression one of bored indifference. And if anyone sees anything unusual, no matter how small, I want to know. We're a team, and we need to work together to make sure we're operating at our best. Luis spoke up, his voice hesitant. Chef, I think someone's been messing with the labels on the herbs. I found some thyme mixed in with the basil earlier. I thought it was just a mistake, but now, Jerome nodded. Thank you, Luis. That's exactly the kind of thing I need to know about. We'll keep a closer eye on things from now on. He dismissed the staff, watching them file out one by one. When only he and Mark remained, Jerome turned to him, his voice low and controlled. I don't know what you're trying to do, but it ends now. I won't let you undermine this kitchen. Mark's smile was slow, almost lazy. You're paranoid, chef. Maybe the pressure's getting to you. You think I'm the one causing all these problems? That's a pretty serious accusation. Jerome held his gaze. I don't have proof yet, but I will. And when I do, you'll be out of here. Mark's eyes flashed with something dark and dangerous. Good luck with that, chef. Until then, I guess you'll just have to keep guessing. Jerome turned away, his hands shaking with anger. He couldn't let Mark get to him, couldn't let him win. He'd worked too hard to get here, and he wasn't about to let one bitter sous chef take it all away. As he locked up the kitchen and headed out into the cool night air, he felt a grim determination settle over him. Mark was playing a dangerous game, but Jerome wasn't going to back down. He would find a way to stop this, to show everyone that he was the right man for the job. And when he did, Mark would regret ever trying to take him down. Jerome stood alone in the kitchen, the early morning sunlight filtering through the windows. He was reviewing the inventory sheets from the previous week, a knot of frustration tightening in his chest. No matter how many times he went over the numbers, things didn't add up. Missing ingredients, discrepancies in orders. It was clear someone was deliberately sabotaging the kitchen, but proving it was another matter. He was so absorbed in his thoughts that he didn't hear Mia and Luis enter the kitchen. It wasn't until Mia spoke that he looked up, surprised to see them there so early. Chef, Mia said softly, glancing at the pile of paperwork on the counter. We need to talk. Jerome straightened, pushing the inventory sheets aside. What's going on? Luis shifted uneasily, his gaze flicking to Mia before he spoke. We've been talking, chef, about everything that's been happening lately. The missing ingredients, the wrong orders. Mia nodded. It's not just bad luck. Someone's doing this on purpose. Jerome felt a surge of relief mixed with a grim satisfaction. He wasn't alone in this, but he kept his voice steady. You're sure? Mia took a deep breath. I saw Mark messing with the labels in the pantry yesterday, right before service. He didn't see me, but he was definitely switching things around. Jerome's jaw tightened. He'd suspected as much, but hearing it confirmed made his anger flare. Why didn't you say something earlier? I wasn't sure, Mia admitted. I thought maybe it was just a mistake, or I was imagining things. But after last night, with everything going wrong, it's too much to be a coincidence. Luis stepped forward. Chef, we've got your back. We want to help, but we need to be careful. If Mark finds out we're onto him, who knows what he'll do? Jerome nodded, his mind racing. He needed to handle this carefully, not just for his own sake, but for the sake of the entire kitchen. If he confronted Mark without solid proof, it could backfire badly. But he couldn't just let things continue as they were. Okay, Jerome said finally. Here's what we're going to do. We need to catch him in the act. If we can prove he's behind this, we'll have something concrete to take to Linda. Mia's eyes widened. You mean, like, set a trap? Exactly, Jerome said, his voice firm. We'll keep doing things as normal, but we'll be watching. I'll set up some cameras in the storage areas and prep stations. If he's messing with anything, we'll catch it on video. Luis nodded slowly. I can keep an eye on the inventory. Make sure everything's where it should be. Check it against the orders as soon as they come in. And I'll keep a close watch on the pantry and the cooler, Mia added. If he tries anything, I'll be there. Jerome felt a wave of gratitude towards them. I appreciate this, both of you. I know it's risky, but we need to stop this before it gets worse, Mia shrugged. It's not just about you, Chef. This is our kitchen too. We can't let someone like Mark destroy what we've worked so hard to build. Luis nodded in agreement. We're a team. And right now, we need to stick together. Jerome's chest tightened with a mixture of pride and relief. Despite everything, he'd managed to earn their trust and support. He wasn't in this fight alone anymore. Thank you, he said, his voice thick with emotion. Let's do this. The next few days were tense but controlled. Jerome installed small cameras in discreet places around the kitchen, hidden among the shelves in the pantry, overlooking the prep stations, and one near the cooler. He checked the footage every night after service, watching for any sign of sabotage. Meanwhile, Mia and Luis kept a close watch on Mark's movements. They made sure to keep things casual, never lingering too long in one place or acting out of the ordinary. But their eyes were always on Mark, waiting for him to slip up. It didn't take long. On the third day, just before the dinner rush, Mia found Mark in the pantry, his back turned as he switched the labels on a set of spice jars. She ducked back around the corner, her heart racing, and sent a quick text to Jerome. He's doing it now. Pantry. Jerome felt his phone buzz in his pocket as he was checking the mise en place at the pass. His stomach clenched as he read Mia's message. He glanced around the kitchen, making sure no one was watching too closely, and slipped quietly towards the pantry. He stopped just outside, peering through the small gap in the door. Mark was inside, his movements quick and precise as he swapped the labels on the jars. Jerome's blood boiled, but he forced himself to stay calm. He pulled out his phone and took a few quick photos through the gap. It wasn't much, but it was something. He stepped back and waited until Mark left the pantry, his expression smug as he returned to his station. Jerome followed him back into the kitchen, his heart pounding. He glanced at Mia, who gave him a small nod. She'd seen everything. Service began, and the kitchen fell into its usual rhythm. Jerome kept his focus, but his mind was buzzing with a plan. He'd check the footage tonight, and if it was clear enough, he'd have all the proof he needed. The night went smoother than it had in days. Jerome felt a sense of anticipation building in his chest. The end of this ordeal was in sight, and he was ready to put it all behind him. When the last plate went out and the kitchen began to wind down, Jerome called Mia and Luis over. We got him, he said quietly. I'll check the footage tonight, but I think we've got enough to take to Linda. Luis let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. Thank God. This has been driving us all crazy, Mia nodded. What's the plan? I'll talk to Linda tomorrow, Jerome said. If she sees what I have, there's no way Mark can talk his way out of it. He'll be gone by the end of the day. Mia's eyes were fierce. Good. He's been getting away with too much for too long. Jerome placed a hand on her shoulder. Thank you, Mia. And thank you, Luis. I couldn't have done this without you. Luis grinned. We're just glad to help, Chef. It's been a long time coming. Jerome nodded, a sense of finality settling over him. He was ready. Tomorrow, this would all be over. He stayed late, waiting until the kitchen was empty before going over the footage. His hands shook as he fast-forwarded through the day, watching the blurry figures move in and out of frame. And then he saw it. Mark, clear as day, switching the labels on the spice jars, his face twisted in concentration. Jerome felt a surge of triumph. This was it. He had him. He saved the footage, backing it up onto his phone and a USB drive. He wasn't taking any chances. He glanced around the dark, empty kitchen, feeling a strange mixture of relief and exhaustion. This was almost over. Tomorrow, he'd confront Mark in front of Linda, and he'd finally be able to focus on what he loved, cooking, leading his team, making Laureate the best it could be. He turned off the lights and left the kitchen. The cool night air, a welcome relief after the stifling tension of the past few days. He walked home slowly, the weight of the past few weeks lifting with each step. When he reached his apartment, he took one last look at the footage, just to be sure. Mark's actions were clear, undeniable. He'd take it to Linda, and she'd have no choice but to fire him. Jerome lay in bed that night, his mind finally quiet. He'd won. He'd proven himself, not just to the staff, but to himself. He could handle this. He could lead this team. And now, without Mark's interference, he could show everyone what he was truly capable of. As he drifted off to sleep, his last thought was one of determination. The restaurant was buzzing with excitement. Laureate had just received news that it had won a prestigious culinary award, Best Fine Dining Experience in New York. The staff gathered in the main dining room after the announcement, a rare moment of celebration in their otherwise hectic schedule. Laughter and applause echoed off the elegant walls, and there was a genuine sense of camaraderie in the air. Jerome stood at the center of the room, feeling a surge of pride and relief. After everything they had been through, the sabotage, the tension, the long hours, this recognition felt like validation. He had proven himself, not just to the staff, but to the entire culinary community. This award was a testament to their hard work and dedication, and for the first time, it felt like the team was truly united. "Thank you, everyone," Jerome began, his voice carrying over the room. "I'm so proud of what we've achieved together. This award isn't just for me, it's for all of us. Every person in this room has contributed to making Laureate the best it can be. Tonight, we celebrate what we've accomplished as a team." There were cheers and claps, and Jerome caught Mia and Luis's eyes, both of them smiling broadly. Even some of the more skeptical staff members looked genuinely pleased. But as Jerome glanced around, his gaze fell on Mark, standing at the edge of the group, his expression dark and brooding. Mark's face was a mask of barely concealed fury. His lips were pressed into a thin line, and his eyes were narrowed, watching Jerome with an intensity that bordered on hatred. Jerome felt a chill run down his spine, but he forced himself to stay composed. This was supposed to be a moment of celebration, not conflict. "I know we've had our challenges," Jerome continued, his voice steady, "but we've come through stronger. I couldn't be prouder to lead this team." There were more cheers, but Mark's silence felt like a shadow over the room. Jerome knew what was coming, but he was determined not to let Mark ruin this moment. Suddenly, Mark stepped forward, his voice cutting through the applause like a knife. "Yeah, congratulations, chef. You must be feeling pretty good right now, huh?" The room fell silent. Everyone turned to look at Mark, their expressions a mix of confusion and concern. Jerome kept his face calm, though his heart was pounding. "I am, Mark," Jerome said, his voice even. "We all should be. This is a huge achievement for the entire team." Mark's smile was cold, almost predatory. "The entire team? Really? Because it feels like some of us have been carrying a lot more weight than others." Jerome's jaw tightened, but he kept his tone measured. "We've all worked hard, Mark. This is a team effort." Mark let out a bitter laugh. "A team effort? You think this is because of you? You've been here for what? A few months? You think you can just walk in and take credit for everything?" Jerome felt the tension in the room ratchet up several notches. He could see the shocked expressions on the faces of the staff, the way they glanced nervously between him and Mark. He took a deep breath, trying to diffuse the situation. "Mark, this is a moment to celebrate our success. If you have something to discuss, we can do it privately." But Mark wasn't listening. He took another step forward, his voice rising. "No, let's talk about it now. Let's talk about how you've been messing up this kitchen since day one. You don't belong here, chef. You're just a showpiece, a token, brought in to make this place look good." There was a collective gasp, and Jerome felt his stomach drop. He had expected resistance, even confrontation, but not this blatant public attack. He glanced at Linda, who was standing near the back, her face pale and stricken. "Mark, that's enough," Linda said sharply, her voice trembling with anger. "This is not the time or place." But Mark wasn't done. His voice became louder, more aggressive, as if all the anger and resentment he had been holding back was finally exploding out of him. "You think you're better than me? You think you deserve this position? You've been here a few months, and you've already managed to screw everything up. You've been sabotaging your own kitchen just to make me look bad, haven't you?" Jerome felt a surge of disbelief. Mark was trying to turn everything around, to pin the blame on him. "That's not true, Mark. I've done nothing but try to make this kitchen better." Mark's face twisted with rage. "Liar! You think I don't know what you've been doing? You think I don't know how you've been trying to push me out?" Jerome took a step forward, his voice low and steady. "I've tried to work with you, Mark, but you've been undermining me since the beginning. I have proof of what you've done. Switching labels, messing with inventory, trying to sabotage this team." Mark's eyes widened for a split second, a flicker of panic crossing his face before it was replaced with anger. "Proof? You have nothing. You're just making excuses because you can't handle the pressure." Jerome pulled out his phone, his hand steady as he brought up the video footage from the pantry. He held it up for everyone to see, the image of Mark switching the labels clear on the screen. "This is what I have, Mark. You've been sabotaging this kitchen, trying to make me look incompetent, but it ends now." There was a stunned silence as everyone watched the video. Mark's face turned an ugly shade of red, his hands clenching into fists. "You set me up," he shouted, his voice breaking. "You've been out to get me from the start. You don't belong here. You'll never belong here." Linda stepped forward, her voice icy. "Mark, that's enough. I've heard more than enough. You're fired. I want you out of this restaurant now." Mark looked around wildly, his eyes darting from Linda to Jerome to the stunned faces of the staff. He seemed on the verge of saying something else, but then he turned on his heel and stormed out, shoving a chair out of his way as he went. The door slammed behind him, leaving a heavy silence in his wake. Jerome let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding, his body trembling with the adrenaline coursing through him. He glanced around the room, seeing the shock and confusion on everyone's faces. Linda stepped forward, her expression softening as she looked at Jerome. "I'm sorry, Jerome. I had no idea it had gotten this bad." Jerome shook his head, still feeling the weight of what had just happened. "It's not your fault, Linda. I just wish it hadn't come to this." There was a murmur of agreement from the staff, and slowly, the tension began to lift. Mia stepped forward, her face serious but determined. "Chef, we're with you. We've seen how hard you've worked, how much you care about this place. Don't let what he said get to you." Luis nodded. "Yeah, we know you've had our backs from the start. We've got yours too." Jerome felt a surge of gratitude and relief. He'd been bracing for backlash, for doubt and mistrust, but instead, he saw support and solidarity in their eyes. "Thank you," he said quietly. "I couldn't have done this without you." Linda nodded, her voice firm. "We're going to move forward stronger than ever. And it's thanks to your leadership, Jerome." There was a ripple of applause, hesitant at first, then growing stronger. Jerome felt a knot in his chest loosen. This wasn't the end of the struggle, but it was a turning point. They'd weathered the storm, and they were still standing. As the applause faded and the staff began to disperse, Jerome felt a strange calm settle over him. He glanced around the kitchen, his kitchen, feeling a deep sense of purpose. They had a long road ahead, but they were on the right path. And with his team behind him, he knew they could accomplish anything. Tonight, they had won a battle. Tomorrow, they would start building something even greater. The morning after the confrontation, the kitchen at Laureate felt different. The air was lighter. The tension that had been simmering beneath the surface finally dissipated. The staff moved with an ease that Jerome hadn't seen since he first arrived. It was as if a dark cloud had lifted, and now they could finally focus on what mattered, the food. Jerome arrived early as usual, wanting to take some time alone in the kitchen before the rest of the staff came in. He walked through the empty space, his footsteps echoing softly against the tiles. He stopped at each station, checking the supplies, making a mental list of what needed to be done. Everything was in order. He felt a strange mix of relief and anticipation. The events of the previous night still weighed heavily on him, but he knew they had turned a corner. Mark's outburst and subsequent firing had been a painful, necessary step. Now, they could begin to rebuild. He was deep in thought when he heard the kitchen door open. He turned to see Linda walking in, her expression thoughtful. She approached him slowly, a small, warm smile on her face. "Good morning, Jerome," she said. "Morning, Linda," Jerome replied, setting down a knife he'd been inspecting. "I didn't expect to see you this early." Linda shrugged, glancing around the kitchen. "I thought I'd come by and see how you were doing." "Yesterday was intense," Jerome nodded, a wry smile tugging at his lips. "That's one way to put it." She sighed, her smile fading. "I want to apologize again for not seeing what was happening with Mark. I should have been more aware." Jerome shook his head. "You couldn't have known. He hid it well, and I didn't have solid proof until recently. It's over now. We can focus on moving forward." Linda nodded slowly. "Yes, we can. And I want you to know that I'm fully behind you, Jerome. You've shown incredible strength and leadership through all of this. I'm grateful to have you here." Jerome felt a surge of emotion at her words. "Thank you, Linda. That means a lot." They stood in silence for a moment, the weight of the past few weeks hanging between them. Then Linda straightened, her expression becoming more businesslike. "I was thinking we should take this opportunity to regroup, to have a meeting with the whole staff and lay out our vision for the future. Show them that we're united, that we're stronger for having gone through this." Jerome nodded. "I agree. We need to set a clear direction. Let everyone know what to expect moving forward." Linda smiled. "Great. Let's plan for that. I'll let everyone know." She turned to leave, then hesitated, looking back at him. "And Jerome, don't be afraid to be proud of what you've accomplished here. You've earned it." Jerome watched her go, her words echoing in his mind. Proud. It felt strange to think of himself that way, after everything that had happened. But there was a quiet satisfaction in knowing he had stood his ground, had faced every challenge head-on, and come out stronger. He took a deep breath and turned back to the counter, focusing on the day ahead. They had a lot of work to do, and he was ready for it. By mid-morning, the kitchen was bustling with activity. The staff moved with a renewed sense of purpose, their conversations punctuated with laughter and the occasional burst of applause as someone nailed a difficult dish or came up with a new idea. It was a world away from the strained atmosphere that had plagued them for so long. Luis and Mia were working side by side at the prep station, chatting animatedly as they prepped vegetables and discussed new menu ideas. Jerome watched them for a moment, a smile spreading across his face. This was what he'd been fighting for. A team that was engaged, excited, and united. "Hey, chef," Luis called, glancing up from his chopping. "Mia and I were thinking about that lamb dish we talked about last week. We've got some ideas if you're up for it." Jerome walked over, his interest piqued. "Absolutely. Let's hear it." Mia wiped her hands on a towel, her eyes bright with enthusiasm. "We were thinking of doing a lamb loin with a pomegranate molasses glaze, served with a wild rice pilaf and roasted root vegetables. It's got the sweet and tangy from the pomegranate, and the earthiness from the rice and vegetables. What do you think?" Jerome considered it, nodding slowly. "I like it. The flavors sound balanced, and it's seasonal. Let's try it out. We can do a tasting this afternoon." Luis grinned. "Sounds good, chef. We'll get started." Jerome watched them go back to work, his heart swelling with pride. This was what he'd been hoping for. Creative collaboration, a willingness to experiment and push boundaries. He felt a sense of fulfillment he hadn't known in a long time. As the day wore on, Jerome made his rounds, checking in with each station, offering feedback and listening to the staff's ideas and concerns. There were no complaints, no undercurrents of resentment. It was just about the food, about making Laureate the best it could be. After lunch service, Linda called everyone together for the meeting they had planned. The staff gathered in the dining room, their faces curious and expectant. Jerome stood at the front with Linda, feeling a slight nervousness, but also a sense of resolve. "Thank you all for coming," Linda began, her voice steady. "I know the past few weeks have been challenging for everyone, but I want you to know that I am incredibly proud of how you've handled everything. We've come through stronger, and now it's time to look to the future." She turned to Jerome, giving him a nod. "I'll let Chef Jerome take it from here." Jerome took a deep breath and stepped forward, meeting the eyes of each staff member in turn. "I want to thank all of you for your hard work and dedication. I know things haven't been easy, and I appreciate each and every one of you for sticking with it, for supporting each other, and for making this kitchen a place where we can create something truly special." There were nods and murmurs of agreement, and Jerome felt a surge of confidence. "We've got an incredible opportunity here," he continued. "This award is proof of what we're capable of, but it's just the beginning. I want us to keep pushing, keep striving for excellence. I want us to create dishes that not only taste amazing but tell a story, reflect who we are as a team." He paused, letting his words sink in. "I want to hear your ideas, your thoughts. This is our kitchen, and together, we're going to take it to the next level." There was a beat of silence, and then a spontaneous round of applause broke out. Jerome felt a warmth spread through him as he looked at the smiling faces of his team. This was what he had fought for, what he had dreamed of. Linda stepped forward again, her smile radiant. "Thank you, Jerome. I couldn't have said it better myself. Let's take this energy and run with it. We've got a bright future ahead." The meeting broke up, the staff buzzing with excitement and ideas. Jerome found himself surrounded by people eager to share their thoughts, their enthusiasm infectious. He listened, taking mental notes, his mind already spinning with possibilities. As the afternoon wore on and the staff dispersed to prepare for the evening service, Jerome took a moment to himself. He stood at the pass, looking out over the kitchen, feeling a sense of peace and purpose he hadn't known in a long time. They had come through the fire and emerged stronger, more united. There would be more challenges, more obstacles, but he knew they could face them together. This was just the beginning. That evening, the kitchen hummed with a new kind of energy. The staff moved with confidence and joy, the dishes coming out of the kitchen reflecting the passion and creativity that had been reignited. The dining room was filled with the sounds of happy diners, the air buzzing with excitement. Jerome moved through the kitchen, offering guidance and praise, his heart swelling with pride as he watched his team work. They were more than just colleagues. They were a family, bound together by their love of food and their determination to succeed. As the last order went out and the kitchen began to wind down, Jerome called everyone together once more. "I just want to say one more time how proud I am of all of you. Tonight was incredible, and it's just the beginning. We're going to do amazing things here, and I'm honored to be a part of this team." There were smiles and cheers, and Jerome felt a deep sense of contentment settle over him. This was what he had been fighting for, what he had dreamed of. A kitchen where everyone was valued, where everyone's voice mattered. As he left the restaurant that night, the cool air washing over him, he felt a sense of peace he hadn't known in a long time. The road ahead was still long, still challenging, but he knew they could face it together. They had built something special, something strong, and together, they would make Laureate shine brighter than ever before. I hope you enjoyed that story. If you did, please watch this story that I think that you will enjoy. Have an amazing rest of your day, and I hope that you will continue to watch more of my videos.